Okay.
This is The Extra Mile.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Extra Mile podcast. I am Justin Duncan, and I'm always here with my illustrious colleague, G5. Hi, George. How are you?
Always. That's right. never leaving.
I don't think I'm going to do this by myself. Then
That's all right.
It would just be me in my room staring straight at a camera.
I think people would enjoy that intimacy.
I think it's the better angle of me, and since I edit the video now, I'm always just going to choose that camera whenever I look straight at my face.
Nice.
Maybe we could talk about vanity today.
Yeah. Sure.
It's definitely something I need to hear.
Vain. Oh, man. What's been going on?
You know, I just work, and I had just a conversation with a colleague at work, and he's pretty stressed, and it seems that's probably something that we could chat about, where stress is such a revealer of, is it your true person? That's kind of how I've pondered it in the past, where I don't know if you've ever seen the show Firefly, but there's this character that they talk about, this old proverb where you can live with a man for 50 years. You can dine with him at your table every day. You can pat his children on your knee, and you can help rear each other's children and be intimate friends. And then the proverb is that you climb to the top of the volcano and you hold him over the precipice of the lava, and at that moment you will meet the man.
Oh, wow. That was so nice at first, and that turned real dark real fast.
Well, that's what life does, I think. If you
really pushes the show. I'm watching this. Me and Paige will watch some TV and stuff as well before bed, and watching this reality television, like a game type show. And you do all these things, and you win a big, huge prize of money. Well, there's a lot of lying and scheming, to get to the end of the game.
Oh.
So you can get the money, and that money really does show the true character of the contestants there, because they're always conflicted throughout this game. Do I play the moral game, and do I tell the truth? Do I stay loyal to my friends, or do I abandon them, throw them under the bus? And there's a lot of people that just to get that money, they're a last-ditch effort. I'm going to throw them under the bus, even though I've been working with these people to the very end. If my neck is on the line, out of it. And I guess that's what you're saying. The stress all just boils up, and you see a person's true colors.
I like that. So we're going to try something new in this episode, where I have an empty page here.
Oh,
we're
going
to write down all the things that we say so that we go back and cover them.
Okay. Very
so
good.
you have your game show. And that's interesting. So how much money? I don't know.
I think it's like 700,000 something.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money.
So let's just say for keeps it's $1 million.
Okay.
A cold $1 million. Okay. So $1 million, is it worth? What's it worth to you? So what happens? They have to do teamwork, and they work up until the last instant, and then only one person gets to keep the money, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Yep, that's true. It's very interesting, and it can be pretty cutthroat.
So what typically happens? I'm assuming you've watched this frequently. So
yeah,
what is there a pattern that emerges?
Yeah. There is a pattern that usually emerges. It's like, I might as well just go ahead and say the show. Might as well at this point.
Okay.
But it's Big Brother, is what it is.
Oh.
And
Big Brother?
Yeah, these contestants all go into a house, and they're all video camera for like a few months throughout the summer.
I've never seen it. I've been familiar with George Orwell's 1984, which he talks about the Big Brother, which I'm assuming
it's loosely based off this idea, because throughout, while the contestants are living in this house for months, they're continually watched. And fans can go on and watch them all the time. So there's that idea of always being watched. And so your sense of morals is going to be seen by this all-seeing eye, whatever that is. And it happens to be us if we're watching the show. And the whole point is they play these competitions throughout the game, and then they lie and scheme throughout as they live in this house. And the whole point is to get to the end and to be the last one in the house, and you get the $700-something thousand, $1 million.
The cool million.
Yeah. It's pretty neat. So at first what happens is they start forming alliances and start forming friendships and bonds, and they will team up on these competitions. And there's no rule for you to do that. It just naturally happens. It's in our psyche to team up and have companion as we go through this. But knowing that at the end of the race, the money, only one person is getting that money. It's very neat, just to think about that type of mentality. And so eventually they'll when it gets closer to the end, if they stuck around a long time, alliances have gone and fallen and been remade and fallen again. There's this constant cycle of new and old alliances. Eventually they have to, metaphorically kill themselves as the gladiators in the Colosseum.
Wow.
Yeah.
So to obtain the prize.
To obtain the prize, yeah.
That's interesting. So why is that compelling to watch?
I guess I just like seeing how the human mind works, because when you're watching it, you're always rooting for you're rooting for the guy who does have morals. You're rooting for the guy who is loyal, who's honest, and is going to play the fair game. But the problem is, he doesn't always win. Mm-hmm. He loses. I've only watched for a few years now, and most oftentimes it's they lose. But it feels really good, and it tastes and it looks really good when someone who's been playing a dirty game gets booted out, and you're like, oh, that's sweet.
Justice.
Justice. That feels good. And so you get that's the type of things that this show is harping on, the type of emotions are those things. And it's very stressful. It becomes very stressful because you're dealing with people too, and people's emotions.
Very much so.
And you're scheming behind actual people. And also, these people, while they're living in this house, they have no technology, no phones, no nothing. And so they have no concept of what's outside at this moment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I see a lot of parallels just with you saying that to, life in Christ and following after him.
Right. It's the world promises money, but the thing is, God promises us eternal life. Mm-hmm. And it's not just for one person. And so while this house, this world, is very corrupt and it can be very cutthroat, there's something instinctive inside us that's always rooting, in a sense, for the good guy, if we're looking outside in. And so it's very important for us then to, I think, follow God's commandments and live with that type of mentality.
Yeah.
And when you have as your goal at your prize, I should say, at the end of the race, eternity with God, that should change our character. That should change our mentality at that moment, because it's not about the money. It's not about those things. There's no need for me to be cutthroat. There's no need for me to be living selfishly. God shifts and he changes the dynamic of life that we would normally think if we didn't have God in our lives, that it is cutthroat and that it's all about the material thing. It's all about the wealth that I get and all that.
I agree. Yeah, I think you're right. You're really hitting something that I think would resonate with so many people. And it doesn't matter when they would potentially listen to that statement. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if they were 1100, if they were in a castle, if they were a peasant, if they were a lord. Everybody kind of wants theirs. It's our nature to do that. It's our nature to look after ourselves. Look at the pandemic.
Right.
You had these people, they go into the grocery stores and they were hoarding toilet paper of all things. But what was so saddening to me is when you hear these reports of these people who had hoarded toilet paper only to sell it out of their trunk.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah.
And I mean, and you would hope that when the stress was on, there was a lot of stress in the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of stress, mostly because there was a lot of unknowns. What's going to happen? We don't know.
Right.
And so you hoped that in the sense of being an American and being in, or I don't know how the rest of the world fared. I know there was lots of death and there was lots of fear. And, you turn to what truly matters to some people. And to some people, it was something as simple as toilet paper, or it was food. It was freezers full of food for sustainability. It was water. It was, it was ignoring it and just going back to work. And, there were some people who weren't fazed and they just continued working. And so I think it showed maybe there's something to that proverb about holding the person that you know so well over the precipice of the volcano, because you truly do get to see who they are when they're stressed. And but I can only assume that to identify it in humankind. So what is human nature? Are we, without God, what do we search for? And let's just say perhaps the first thing is money. So we want money. And it's interesting what you said about your game show, where the ultimate motivation, the people wouldn't enter that house unless there was a cash prize.
Right.
I don't know about you, but I wouldn't go on Wheel of Fortune unless there's going to be a cash prize.
Right.
And so, of course, that being said, I'm sitting here and there's not a cash prize. So.
That's all right. That's all right. But there's something. So go back to your volcano analogy there, or proverb. They're holding them over the volcano and they're stressed, right? Is that the idea that I'm getting?
Well, yeah. I mean, you look death in the face. And
Yeah.
That's the most stressed that people can be. And I think that's what happened to the pandemic. We've talked about that briefly.
So there's so when that person does, you see that person's true character. I guess they could either be very violent, or they could be selfless in a sense, right?
Yeah.
And instinctively, you have to choose whether being violent, you throw them in the volcano or not.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Jesus makes a sacrifice for us.
Yeah.
I think about all of this and think about the race that we're running, this life, and what's at the end. I thought of Hebrews 12, and it says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, those are those that are faithful before us, we must get rid of every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and run with endurance the race that is set before us, keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set out for him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God." So that shame and that cross comes with a lot of violence, a volcano analogy there. Think of him who endured such, as Jesus, such opposition against himself by sinners, so that you may not grow weary in your souls and give up. It's so much easier to want to give up when we're stressed and we're looking at death in the face there, to give in to that kind of hypno idea. "You have not yet," it says, verse 5, "resisted to the point of bloodshed in your struggles against sin, and you have you forgotten the exhortation addressed to you as sons." I read that, when I first read that, and I thought, I pictured myself running this race, and everyone else is behind me. And it's me running the race, and I'm ahead, and I'm looking at Jesus, and you have all the faithful there in the crowd, and it's like it's the Olympics in the 1940s, right, and all this stuff. And then you make it to the finish line. And I've been envisioning that all wrong. There's some sense that's right.
It's so interesting you say that, because I felt the same way. where
Yeah.
I've pondered that many times, and I've said that it seems that there's a contradiction when you are studying the Bible, because working out your faith seems so selfish.
Right.
And perhaps with the wrong interpretation, you go to Jesus's quote of talking about hypocrites, and you say, why do you look at your brother and say you've got a speck in your eye, and you disregard the log or the plank or the branch that's coming out of your eye? And then, hypocrite, remove the branch so you can help your brother.
Mm-hmm.
And, righteous justice and all that, it's really easy to look at somebody else and see somebody else's fault.
Yeah.
And it seems that the correct course when it comes to biblical living and putting on Christ and the new man is about self-control and introspective thinking and looking at yourself and trying to improve as much as you can with the help of God, devoting yourself to that work.
Yeah, yeah.
And to take our volcano analogy, perhaps, to say, if you're being held over the precipice of the volcano by the devil or whoever, do you cry for mercy, or do you embrace your fate, or what do you do? And perhaps there's no answer. Perhaps it's a continuous answer that we have to ponder our whole lives, because that's what our life here on this earth does to us. At least what I've experienced is that there seems to be seasons of joy and happiness and peace, prosperity.
Yeah.
And then in the blink of an eye, you can have seasons of, well, like Job, where nothing went wrong. I mean,
nothing's going right.
Nothing's going wrong,
Yeah.
and then turning on a dime, nothing can go right,
Mm-hmm.
and everything's taken from you.
Yeah.
And it seems that what the world would say to you is, and frankly, what we all experienced in the pandemic is, do what you got to do to get yours, and fie everybody else.
To go back to your Jesus analogy there with the log and the speck,
Yeah.
you then apply that to Job for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Job's friends had a log in their eye,
Yeah.
right? And you could say Job had a speck or something, just for the sake of talking. Caleb pointed this out. Which one's easier to take out?
It's easier to take out the thing out of your own eye.
It's easier to take out the log, I'd say.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's much harder to take out the speck. And so applying that to Job had the much harder position to push through and ignore his friend's advice and have that wisdom and the discernment to see God still is in control.
Mm-hmm.
And who am I trusting here?
It's Matthew 7, by the way, is what I was quoting.
Matthew 7. And you go back to Hebrews 12 when we were talking about running that race. It's not a racetrack where there's individual sections and lanes and you're the one running it. We do individually endure things, but the idea is that if we're all running a race that we can get to eternity, it's a marathon with a group of people on a street.
Absolutely.
And we're running together, and one falls, we pick them up, and we help. And there's these cloud of witnesses that have run this race, finished, and are looking at us to see if that's what we're doing, if we are living and acting like Christ and being imitators toward Christ.
Absolutely. And that's the better way, right? So here's a counterfactual. So what would have been the Christian response to the pandemic and the fear-mongering of the toilet paper? Is it just doing without, or is it hoarding it for yourself?
Get the leaves.
Well, I mean, there's no trees here. Have you lived in Lubbock?
That's true.
Is it going and getting a stockpile of it and distributing it to those who have need?
Mm-hmm.
Is it something else? What would you say? Because I don't know.
I'd say it's what they did in Acts 2.
Okay.
They all shared among themselves. They all helped each other. They saw each other as a family, and they went out and then helped those that were in need. And spreading the gospel. I know that when that was happening and there was no toilet paper to be found, we asked many people in church, and they would give to those that were in need, or they would give information that was helpful. Hey, yeah, United, it's your local grocery store here, doesn't have any toilet paper. Walmart doesn't have any toilet paper. Hey, CVS does. Oh, okay, yeah. Thanks for the heads up. Oh, you want me to grab you some on the way out? That's sure. Thanks. But we're there for each other. It's not one mind in the sense it's my mind. It's one mind. This is, we're all connected and we're thinking about each other. We're caring about each other. I think it's at the end there of Acts 2.
Yeah, I've got it. Well, I have the end of Acts 2. The ingathering, everyone kept feeling a sense of awe.
Let's see.
Is that right?
Maybe, yeah. I get the 1, 2.
Oh, yeah, that is right. So Acts 2:43 says everyone kept feeling a sense of awe, and many wonders and signs were taking place through the apostles, and all those who had believed were together and had all things in common, and they began selling their property and possessions, and were sharing them with all, as anyone might have need. Day to day, continuing with one mind in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, they were taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord was adding to their number day by day those who were being saved.
Yeah.
That's such an amazing concept. I remember having discussions with parents and adult figures about the concept of communism. And I know I just said the bad C word.
Yeah, man. Ooh.
But at least when I read Thomas More's Utopia for class, it was a consideration of different doctrines and basically critiquing them over human nature versus any type of societal philosophy that is not in the context of God and being a Christian. And so you can take capitalism, you can take communism, you take all of these things. And when you interject mankind and their desire for money, their desire for possessions, their desire for self, and it goes back even to the Garden of Eden. They lusted after these things, and they had the power, and so they took it. And that's humankind, and we can't trust people who have been swayed by the deceiver, the devil. And so I'm not saying that we should adopt any type of economic or socioeconomic system other than considering what the Bible says. And there's something here at the end of Acts 2. Well, you have to also put it in the context of the Jews and what property did they have. Are we talking about people that now they just live on the street?
So, yeah, I think there needs to be a separation here between church and state, too.
Okay.
I think these are individual Christians acting as a family, as one. When you start applying this to a state, now you're intertwining things that were meant to be separate. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's.
Very true.
Those two things are separate things. These people are giving, a sense to God, and they're contributing and loving God and loving their neighbor as themselves in this sense. Once you then start mixing in theocracy, policy, moral hierarchy by a government that has a sword and a gun to your head, are we really being Christ-like?
I think that's an interesting thought, and I don't know. I definitely can tell from history and studies of history that those times where, like you were saying, theocracy, where if you look at the medieval ages, there seems to even be infighting in times of peace. I would say the last however many years, at least as long as I've been alive, we've had a relative peace in the world. Considering like World War II, World War I, all of the imperialism conflicts that Europe had done in colonizing the world, and all of those uprisings that happened in the 20th century. You look kind of now in our time period, we relatively have a lot of peace. There is still conflict, but at least we're not all done into a world war, say. And when you when you consider that piece, that there are times to reflect when there wasn't that. So, like, say the medieval ages, the Crusades, trying to, in some of my history studies, they taught that, well, they're going to go reclaim the Holy Land. Well, that seems to be justification for a series of, here's a history lesson for you. I had read many articles and books and lectures over
Give it to me.
why the Crusades happened.
Yeah.
And it was very fascinating, especially when you read the accounts of the Muslims and the forces of like Salah ad-Din whenever they saw these Europeans showing up in the Holy Land and claiming, hey, this is Jerusalem. This is where our Lord and Savior died, and we're going to take this place over. And, okay, fine. And it seems that there seemed to be before and after that a free flow of trade and idea, and that basically got us out of the medieval ages into the Renaissance. If you look at timeline of history, that interaction between Muslims and Christians,
Really?
Europe, yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. I mean, even look at the Western numeral system. That's why we have Roman numerals. They were these conflagrated mathematical equations, essentially.
I guess it goes back to any empire, right?
Yeah.
As they go and conquer other lands, they get new cultures, new ideas, and that helps. I mean,
Yeah,
Roman,
and
Alexandria.
They actually call them the numbers that we write with are called Arabic numerals, and so it's a shape. These sort of I don't even know the etymology of it, but I know that they are Arabic and that they are markings that are concise compared to the Roman equivalent. So, like, if you were going to write 225,000, then we just do the numbers that we did in math and going in school. And if you're going to do that in Roman numerals, it's this
long XO.
I
don't know what
this is before
X,
that. And,
M. Yeah.
Well, I don't know
Ones.
I don't remember the number that I just said out of the air, but I can give it to you. It takes a while. And they had time to do that because they were carving it into marble. So it's like, and next is V. Anyway.
Interesting. Okay.
So there's this free flow of ideas, but the reason why the Crusades happened, at least some of the writings that I had read from these lectures, is that because of the fiefdom system, where you had like a lord who was the king of the castle, and he was...
King of the castle.
Exactly. And he had a title, and he had a manor house, and he had a fiefdom, which you had servants, and you had barons and sergeants, and you had this hierarchy of people who ruled over other people.
Peasants.
Well, and they were basically the lowest caste,
Okay,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
they were the people working the farm lands and all of that. And then everybody kind of paid taxes up the way. And so another thing that held them into power was when, say, a lord or a king or a baron or whoever was infighting, or when it got to the point where you had whole kingdoms that were going to fight, you would raise your armed forces, men at arms and knights and people of different ranks and titles. They would all be called into service under the name of this one king. And so that's how you have all of these amazing stories that you see on Amazon, Game of Thrones-esque.
Sure.
That's all sort of derivative of what
Of
really
that
happened.
idea, of an historical idea.
Yeah, and so those title and land and possessions can only be passed to the firstborn son, the male, first male.
Right.
And so with that, what happens if you had 6 sons?
Mm-hmm.
What happens to the other 5? Well, they have no title, they have no land, they have nothing. They're educated, seemingly. They know how to fight because they're men at arms. They know how to, just in case one of the older brothers died, they were all sort of trained to run the manor house. And so it seemed that there was this population boom, and what do you do with all these people? You go conquer new lands. And so this is the thesis of this class: is why did the Crusades happen? It happened because you had this theocracy structure where we're going to justify our actions by taking the Holy Land because we need to.
It's holy, yeah.
And, not to say that perhaps that removes the power of God, perhaps, whatever. We as humans are going to interject and we're going to do this one thing. And then you have this entire cyclical structure of generations of men that have nothing to do. They have nowhere to go. They have no claim. And so they can actually go conquer new lands, and they can be their own kings even. And some of them were. Some of them were crowned kings of Jerusalem and these other, Antioch, these other places that they had taken. In the Holy Land.
Yeah.
And so there seemed to be, that perpetuated itself for hundreds of years through different Catholic popes and that type of theocracy structure, this sort of notch separation of church and state.
Right.
So it's an interesting concept to think about human history, at least from what we can tell from writings. Maybe that's not the best way. I mean, obviously, I know from our interpretation of the scriptures is that we want to put on Christ in all things, and Christ very specifically teaches a separation of giving to Caesar what is Caesar, and give to God what is God's, and that there's a duality in man. It seemingly we want to focus on the spiritual things.
Yeah. But there's that aspect that you're talking about with the Crusades and everything. You have the mix of powers. And what that does is it goes right back to Genesis. It goes right back to human nature. It goes right back to what we were talking about with the game show. The idea of money. Why do we want money? Yes, it supplies our needs. That's one thing.
Yeah.
It also gives us something we don't have. And oftentimes what we don't have, because we're humans, is power. And what were they lusting after? What did they want? In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, they wanted what they didn't have. They wanted, as Satan said, so you could be like God. They wanted that power, that the wisdom, the knowledge of good and evil.
What is it about power? Is it control? Is it the ability to create something? Is it control over your own self, where I get to make my own decisions?
You see, this is one like Jordan Peterson would be good to ask that question. I don't know. Yeah, we're right. But from a
let's ask him.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey Jordan, will you write in, Mr. Peterson?
What is about power that is so instinctful? Power gives us a sense of godlikeness, I'd say. It gave, and since we are created, we're created in God's image. And Satan comes in, just stay with the Genesis story, and sin then comes in. There's that idea of, well, this thing can now give me the power I need to be like God, and I can dominate, I can rule, I can control. Maybe it is like a sense of control. I don't know, man. What are you thinking?
It got really deep. It got really deep right now.
Yeah. Your fault.
I know. I think it's because we're doing it in the afternoon and not early.
Not early in the morning.
I immediately thought, whenever you were talking about power, it maybe it gives us a sense of control, but is it real or is it fake?
Well, it's obviously fake, because anyone with even the most powerful people can be not just the most horrible of people, but can ruin their own lives, ruin their own demise, and that's when there's a sense of I can't rely on myself.
Yeah. It definitely is, and obviously that's the better way. We've talked about that, where we can try to interject our own power and our own talent and our own will, and Job even talks about that, where in their surmisings, the powerful people do what they want.
Yeah.
On this planet. I mean, look at lobbyists in Congress. Look at big businesses. They're able to throw money around, and it seems that money is power, and they get what they want.
Right.
And then what Job says, Job 20 and Job 19, they're talking about what befalls man when they gain the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
They basically die, and they return to the dust, and they don't take it with them.
Right.
And Jesus even saying, unless you believe in me and follow after me, you will die in your sins. And there's something compelling about, if you are living in the world, if you are seeking after the power of the world, you may obtain it all.
Yeah.
And what does it profit you if you gain the whole world? If you're the king of the universe,
Yeah, Matthew 4, right?
time will still take you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's folly.
It just goes to show that God is in control. We can't rely on ourselves.
Absolutely.
But there is this sense of we want power because we forget, just for a second, that God is there and God is real. And maybe we live our whole lives forgetting and really not even believing or knowing God.
Yeah.
But there is a sense that when me and you go about our day-to-day lives and we can start our day off, reading God's word and walking with him and praying with him, and those things are really helpful. But when temptation then comes in, temptation is this distraction. It's a moment where we forget God just for a second. And that's when Satan then lures in and it can trap us because our attention now is on that object, that thing, that sin, that power, that money. And that's when Satan strikes, and we can then now in that moment of forgetfulness, we rely on our pride because that's all we can do. And what Satan has done is abandoned us. He's drawn us away from God to be alone, to be distracted, to be focusing on something else. And in our sin, we totally forget God. Just for that moment, maybe. But maybe also for the rest of our life. I pray that's not the case for many of us.
Yeah, and maybe that's a way to look at it. If you find yourself a momentary lapse, a momentary giving in of a desire, a want, a need, and how quickly it can spiral away from you. And, you think about infidelity. I'm in a Gordon Lightfoot kick. I don't know if you ever listened to his music.
Mm-mm.
But I've had a couple of his albums and I've listened to his stuff, and I was looking him up on Wikipedia, and I was kind of shocked. I was reading his Wikipedia page, and he had been married 3 times, and he even is quoted in that page of saying that it was because of his infidelity, because he was touring, that having a fidelity relationship, a monogamous relationship at distance was too challenging for him, especially when you're dealing with fame, stress. And he gave into those temptations, and it ruined his marriages. And it made me sad to think of that, because I really enjoy his music, and there seems to be kind of what you were saying was you're always rooting for the moral choice.
Right.
You're always rooting for the person who has moral integrity. And then when you find that somebody that you enjoy their art or you enjoy their work, or perhaps you've studied under in the church, or whatever, and that you find out that they are in fact fallible, and that they are human, and that they are not as moral as you may have perceived them to be.
Mm-hmm.
And how disappointing that could be, just because we're all human. And I think that recognizing that none of us are really better than anybody else, and that we need each other. We need each other to be kind.
Yeah, full circle. Now we need each other. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, these.
But in order to make that need for each other meaningful, we have to have God at the center of our lives.
Yeah, we can't do it together, because I think people have tried in the past, and I think people are just always going to be momentary lapses of temptation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's enough. That's enough to create the chaos in the world. We did an interesting study in school about accuracy in music. And so if you were to take an orchestra and you were going to play the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and let's just take the first 16 bars. And
okay, I don't even know what those are.
Well, some of you music nerds know what I'm talking about. So the first 16 measures, if you were just going to play that, practice it over and over with the orchestra, and you instruct the orchestra to make one mistake purposefully. Okay, everybody can play this perfectly. Everybody choose one mistake, either dynamic or pitch or intonation or words or whatever. There's no words in Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, but And then they performed it, and it was catastrophically bad. Just one mistake. Everybody
Really?
choose one. Choose one mistake, and it doesn't matter where, what, or when, or how, but go for it. And it was catastrophic. It was unrecognizable. You could not recognize
That's
the
so
symphony.
fascinating.
Yes. Well,
Wow.
and I think the lesson in the context of music is accuracy is key, right? So, and it's what I call typewriting. So we want the dynamics, and we want the notes, and we want the words correct.
Right,
All that.
right.
That's the typewriting part. And then there's something more. But putting that aside and talking about accuracy is that, let's say we have a perfect world, and if everybody makes one mistake in their lifetime, that's enough to create the chaos of the world.
Yeah. Wow. You're absolutely. I think you're absolutely right.
I am
think you're
right.
absolutely
End of
right.
podcast.
Boom. Done.
Mic drop. Wait, don't. These are expensive.
There's that sense that we can get everything right, but if we don't have Jesus, if we don't have love,
Exactly.
then we don't have anything. I think sometimes we read that. Just turn to 1 Corinthians 13. I had this in a Bible study one time, and it hit me, and it really helped me to understand. Right, we always say God is love, God is love, God is love. But-
God is love.
Right. How do we actually apply that? So this famous passage is done at all at weddings. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4 through 7. Love is patient. Love is kind. It's not envious. Love does not brag. It is not puffed up. It is not rude. It is not self-serving. It is not easily angered or resentful. It is not glad about injustice, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. What is that even talking about? Many people read that at their weddings and think, well, that's talking about our love
It's
between
talking
each
about
other.
our marriage.
That's right. It never ends. Dun, 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 dun.
It doesn't end.
Yeah, and introduce Beethoven's Fifth. There we go. But what that's describing in essence is God. You read that again. God is patient. God is kind. He is not envious.
Yeah.
God does not brag. He is not puffed up. He's not rude. He's not self-serving. He's not easily angered or resentful. He's not glad about injustice. He rejoices in the truth. He bears all things. He believes all things. He hopes all things. He endures all things. God, we know, never ends. It puts a whole new meaning and perspective on who it
really
is we're
does.
serving.
And in that context, what's the counterfactual? What does brag?
Right. So if we could have tongues and prophecies and tongues of angels, if we don't have God, we have nothing. If we don't have love, we have nothing. And so that's the piece that we're missing, that we need for our symphony to be this beautiful, beautiful music.
So what is not patient? What is not kind? And what is jealous? And what brags? And what is arrogant?
I'd say sin's the opposite of what is God, what God ordains. He's created us to be good, right? We were good in the garden. We chose not to be. And so he believes that we have the sense and the ability to follow after Jesus, and Jesus is the one that makes us perfect, and we can be essentially like Christ.
It seems
it's
to be
not-
the way of the world, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'd never looked at that passage that way. I think that's a great study. That's a great way to interpret that and ponder those things, because humankind's are that way. I mean, if you look at all of this is the pandemic and what we just experienced all in one paragraph of what humans can do to one another.
Yeah.
Yeah, they boasted, they bragged, they shouted at each other. They were not patient. They were not kind. They were arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
They acted unbecomingly, what New American Standard says. They sought after their own.
Yeah.
They were provoked.
They were. Absolutely. Yeah.
They took into account a wrong suffered. And they rejoiced in unrighteousness.
Right.
Stealing and hoarding and...
And so then you go down to the bottom there, and it says, and now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. Right.
Faith, hope, and love.
Yeah.
abide in these three. You know, it seems that the walk of the human without God, Paul talks about it being imprisoned. And whenever we were talking earlier, it inspired me to look up Acts 26. And I love this passage. Basically, Paul has appealed to Caesar. And so he was going to basically be killed by the Jews in Jerusalem. And he had appealed, I think actually they were in Caesarea. And he had appealed to Caesar, which was his Roman right. As anyone who was about to suffer injustice or be placed on trial, they could have their case being heard before the emperor.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had made a public cry to appeal to Caesar. And so he had made his way up through certain magistrates and such, and he found himself in front of King Agrippa, who was the king of Jerusalem, excuse me, under Roman rule. And so, and Agrippa is a crazy character. I mean, if you want to look him up on Wikipedia, we won't go too much into all of his debauchery and sin, but he did have authority over Paul. And so there's Paul standing in front of him, and he is in chains, which he mentions earlier. But reading Acts 26:24, he is giving this amazing defense. And if you have time, I would recommend reading that before, but we won't do that for the podcast. But starting in verse 24, while Paul was saying this in his defense, Festus, who was one of the other magistrates, said in a loud voice, "Paul, you are out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you mad." Doesn't the world say that to us constantly whenever we're talking about following after Christ? Like, you're all idiots. You're all stupid. Your great learning is driving you mad, he says. But Paul said, this is 25, "I am not out of my mind, most excellent Festus." He even gives him a little pat on the back there. Mm-hmm. "But I utter words of sober truth, for the king knows about these matters," because he was a Jew, or at least he was by, he was at least on the surface. "And I speak to him also with confidence, since I am persuaded that none of these things escape his notice, for this has not been done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do." He doesn't even allow him to answer. Agrippa replied to Paul, "In a short time you would persuade me to become a Christian." And Paul said, "I would wish to God that whether in a short or a long time, not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for these chains." He was telling Agrippa, the king of the land who had been given Roman authority, that he was free, and that the king who was not in chains is the one who was actually bound in a prison. And so he says, "I want everybody to be as I am, except for these chains." You can even imagine him shaking these iron,
without these unjust sufferings.
These iron shackles.
Yeah.
But it says earlier up in the chapter that he was discussing with them and Festus about self-control and in reasoning and how to bridle the body. And then Agrippa makes his entrance and he gives his defense, and this is what this chapter is in Acts 26. But the fact that we have that recorded is Luke to a T. Beautiful. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Luke, for giving us that. And I actually wanted to do a series of writings, which I may do soon.
Oh, wow.
Excuse me. About, not writings, it's much more compiling, about the monologues of the scriptures.
Yeah.
Because, in the theater world, you're supposed to learn speeches, essentially, that are in these plays. And they're called monologues because mono, one, logos to speak. And so...
when I took acting class, I had to do a monologue.
Okay. Yeah, so this is obviously a monologue, right? And so there's many, many, many throughout the Bible. And I thought that would be a really neat compilation of monologues, is taking the monologues of the Bible. And this is definitely one of them. But you can deduce with Paul saying, "I would wish to God that whether in a short or long time," okay, short or long time, "not only you, King Agrippa, but all who hear me this day," and not just that day, right now, If you're listening to this right now, Paul is appealing to you. And he is appealing to us that he wants us to be free. And how do we become free? Well, we talked about it. You're 1 Corinthians 13.
Mm-hmm.
What is God? God is love. God is patient. God is kind.
I mean,
and when we put on God, when we put on Christ, we are actually taking off the shackles. We're removing ourselves from the game show.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
We don't need to be in that room. It seems like we're all born in it. We want that. We want the money. We want the fame. We want the power. And then to be able to freely, and that's our choice, to walk out of that prison cell. And you put on Christ.
Right.
You believe that he's the Son of God. You believe that he came to earth, that he died. 3 days later, he was resurrected in bodily form, and he ascended to heaven.
Yeah.
And then from there, you confess that belief, and you're baptized. You're raised up with him, and then you have the new spiritual walk where you've put on Christ, and that you then put away the old self, and you put on the new. And that has to do with your behavioral change, your repentance. And so if you just heard that, that's the call. And so that's why we're here talking about the things that we talk about. Because it seems that, I like how free form and organic that was, but like it just seems that the game show, which is compelling to watch because they all willingly locked themselves in that room, didn't they?
Right.
Because they want the money.
Cash. Yeah.
But that's kind of what we all do anyway. We're all stuck in this bodily coil. We didn't necessarily choose to be born, perhaps, but here we are. We find ourselves here, and so we can either choose ourself. We can choose to be deceived by the devil, to obtain nothing. Even if you gain the whole world, even if you're on top of Mount Everest and you have your throne up there and you have dragons flying around you or whatever conflagration, you have airplanes or blimps, and you have people bowing to you and saying that you're the most amazing thing that's ever been born of man, time will still come and get you.
That's right. That's right. That's in Matthew 4, right? Right. Jesus is in the wilderness. And
are you going to read it?
If I can find it, yeah.
Oh.
Well, he answers, there's several different temptations. It says, after he fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, this is the first temptation, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become bread. And he answered, it is written, man does not live on bread alone, but every word that comes from the mouth of God. That is a really big statement for Jesus to say, and that we should be applying that to our life. And that acts as the beginning of not just our life, but also as he's in this wilderness being tempted of how he's going to respond to the other ones, because he's living for God, not bread alone. And then the devil took him to a holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple, and he said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you. With their hands they will lift you up so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Jesus said to him once again, it is written, you are not to put the Lord your God to the test. God's in control. We're not in control. Who are we living by? Verse 8, again, the devil took him on a very high mountain, there he is, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their grandeur. And he said to him, I will give you all these things if you throw yourself to the ground and worship me. That's who we're worshiping, really, a sense, when we're not worshiping God or living for God or living for bread. And then Jesus said to him, go away, Satan, for it is written, you are to worship the Lord your God and serve only him. And the devil left him. And the angels came and ministered to him and to his needs, it says. So who are we living for? Who are we serving? That's more important, like you were saying, than anything, than having the whole world.
I know that Ecclesiastes 12 and seemingly the writing of Solomon.
It's my favorite book.
And
in the Old Testament.
It's fascinating to read the accounts of First, Second Kings, and the Chronicles, because you get a little glimpse of Solomon, and that God came to him, and because of his love for David, his father, he offered him whatever he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
What would you ask of me? I'll give it to you. And Solomon's response was, I want wisdom, I want understanding, and I want knowledge and discernment. And God's response was, because you didn't ask for wealth or long life or possessions, I'm going to give you what you asked for, and then I'm going to give you all of that other stuff too.
Right.
And so, but then we also know that Solomon succumbed to having many wives, which he basically disobeyed the commandments of what God had said. When kings arise, don't have many chariots and don't have many wives, and he had a lot of them.
He had a lot of those, yes.
But at the end of Ecclesiastes 12, we quote this a lot, but if you haven't read Ecclesiastes, I'd recommend it. And it basically gives the conclusion of the whole matter. Ecclesiastes 12:13. The conclusion, when all has been heard,
Mm-hmm.
all the wisdom of the world, all the wisdom of God is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. And Jesus specifically quotes that. It's my favorite verse in the entire Bible. It's John 14:15. And you quoted that this Sunday.
I did.
In case you forgot. I was paying attention.
That happens.
That John 14:15, Jesus tells his disciples, and indeed us, if you ask me anything in my name, I will do it. And if you love me, you will keep my commandments.
Mm-hmm.
If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Where Jesus is God, he was God in bodily form. And he says exactly the same thing. If you love me, keep my commandments. And so what are the commandments of God, George?
The commandments of God are summed up, because for the sake of time, right? Are summed up to you love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and that you love your neighbor. Second is this, you love your neighbor as yourself.
It's yeah, and I think that's it. So what was the main word that you repeated over and over and over again? You love.
That's right.
And so I'm so glad that you said that about 1 Corinthians 13. That's got me really thinking differently about that chapter. That God is love. And so we're supposed to, if we love God, we have to obey his commandments, and that is to love God and then love each other.
Yep.
Which is the exact opposite of a lot of what we saw publicly during the pandemic.
Oh, yeah. Of course we did. Of course we did.
Which is the exact opposite of what we see in Big Brother, perhaps, or any survival, what do they call it, reality television?
Right. There's always something missing, right, when we don't have God in our lives. You take the I haven't watched the new Lord of the Rings show or anything like that.
Oh, on Amazon?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't either.
But I've only heard like bad things.
Oh, don't listen to critics. They're idiots.
Yeah, I know.
Perhaps that wasn't very kind. I apologize.
Oh, I mean, I don't know. But what the trend I do see, and I guess I can't say this till I actually watch it, is that you have these new writers writing something different than what Tolkien actually designed his fantasy, his world, I should say, around his worldview, which was this Christian idea. And then you take writers and you twist it, and there's no concept of this understanding of God and understanding of Jesus and his sacrifice for us, and you try to make that same world happen, and you're writing it just on the morals of today. You watch it and it just feels like there's something missing.
Oh, interesting.
And that it goes back to what you're saying with your symphony. You got one mistake, and it just doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
There's just something off about it. And we can ignore that. We can live our whole lives ignoring that and thinking, well, it's still a song.
Yeah.
But
there's something similar, and you probably heard many times the trope of how the book is. Oh, when they always make the books into movies or
Right.
plays or whatever, it's always lacking. The book's always better, right? That's
Yeah,
the,
yeah,
that's the
it is.
trope. The book's always better. But it's true. The book is better because you can fill much more information in a book than you can in a 90-minute movie, 120-minute
Right.
movie, whatever. And so one of my favorite examples of that is the Count of Monte Cristo.
So good.
And the movie I love, and I think it's fantastic. And it actually inspired me to read the book. And have you ever read The Count of Monte Cristo?
I haven't read it. It's on my shelf. I should read it. I
Well,
haven't read it.
It'll take you a long time.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's a big book.
Yeah.
But I loved the movie so much, I was inspired to read it earlier in my life. And the book is nothing like the movie.
Really?
Nothing like it. Mostly because Victor Hugo writes in a different style than what we're sort of used to, especially Hollywood writers. But the book was so enjoyable because it was so fleshed out and okay, well, some things didn't end up the way that it ended up in the movie. And so there was this huge outcry that I remember reading about, well, they didn't follow the book. And I guess why wouldn't you? Because the book is it was meant to be entertainment in its time, and then based off of the story, you can make an entertaining movie.
Right. Sure. Sure.
That perhaps challenges today's audiences.
Mm.
So I could see the justification of taking a Tolkien story that's not The Lord of the Rings, which has been done umpteenth times, and doing something from the Second Age.
Yeah.
Or even the First Age, or even the Silmarillion. That's why I was so disappointed with like the Star Wars movies.
Yeah, it's the same concept. Yeah.
It's really the same concept, but it fell so short because they could have. If they're, I mean, I love the Star Wars universe. Let's do any story that's not in, the Skywalker area. We've done that. Why do we have to bring them back and kill them? I don't know. Spoiler alert. But I was just so sad and disappointed because they're trying to remake all of the movies from like when we were younger.
Yeah.
And they're kind of falling short. Hocus Pocus 2 is coming out soon.
Yeah. No, I'm good.
I love Hocus Pocus. I mean, we watch it every Halloween. It's like a tradition in my family. I love Halloween. It's my favorite.
Really?
Holiday, yeah.
Man.
And my mom and my dad always made it really special. And so that particular, it's fun to dress up in costumes and watch spooky stories.
I think we're the opposite here. I like spooky stories. Don't get me wrong. Every year, October, I read Edgar Allan Poe, but that's about as far as
Excellent.
I get. I can't get myself to dress up. Maybe I'm just a no fun of a person.
No, it's fine. It's just what I've always done.
Yeah, I think that's really cool.
For all the theater that I've done.
That makes sense. Yeah, the theater and the plays.
Well, I did the theater because of dress up and play that we did it in my own home.
That's so
growing
cool.
up. Yeah. So, and to each their own, and whatever. But I love that type of storytelling, and I love Hocus Pocus. It's such a great, fun movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're making a second one, and so we'll see. I'll give an update whenever I watch it.
Yeah, please do.
But I at least what the tendency of commercialization in movies is that they really kind of milk the cow past what it should be done.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we're chit-chatting again, but
I think that's a good way to end it, right?
just how disappointed I am with Hollywood.
How disappointed you are, Hollywood. Hollywood. But what's cool about Halloween, though, before we end, is you do dress up. And oftentimes, because of our culture, we're dressing up, just kind of like scary aspects. But a lot of times you see people dressing up as their heroes, right?
Yeah.
God calls us to put on Christ. And
Are you saying that we need to dress up like Jesus?
no, don't. I'm not saying this is physical. This is very abstract.
Oh, it's not physical. Okay.
Yeah.
So spiritually.
I'm trying to turn this around so we have an ending that's spiritual.
Okay. Spiritual ending.
Yeah. But to put on Christ and to, to go and walk like him, be imitators of him.
Yeah. We definitely hit that pretty heavily in the middle there. It was a really great study, and you really got me thinking about 1 Corinthians 13. God is love.
Oh, it
And
keeps me thinking too.
God is patient. God is kind. Anyway, those are great thoughts. So I know that for at least a call to action, we need to put on Christ, like you were saying.
There we go. There we go. Go love God and love other people. All right. That's a wrap.
It's
Go
a
so.
Oh, I just talked over you. Okay, go again.
All right, here we go. Go so.
And we're out.